Good people go to Congress promising change. Then most of the time, the only thing that changes when they get there is them. Are they pressured by the establishment party leadership to fall in line? Or is there a room where they take them in and suck their brains out upon arrival? We'll discuss that, the protests in Michigan, and more. Joining me from his lockdown location in Michigan is legendary former Congressman, 2012 Republican presidential candidate, best-selling author, and the lead guitarist for the Flying Squirrels, Thaddeus McCotter. Thaddeus, great to have you with us, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm curious, when was the best-selling book put out?
I don't know. I read that on the internet. Plus, I also got a couple of excerpts. So I'm going to order it on Amazon today if that's deemed a essential item.
Yeah, well, actually, kind of probably is. The first one that I put out was a hardcover with actual paper. So given the dearth of toilet paper, it could be considered essential.
Well, you guys are up in corncob country. You're up in Michigan. You're joining us. You're kind of out in the sticks there. Before we get into talking about some of the cool stuff in your life in public service, what's going on up there right now? Michigan is kind of a tough place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, I live in Livonia, which is in Wayne County with Detroit, and our county is like the third worst hit from COVID-19 cases and deaths in the country. So we're going through a very difficult period of time. The good news is most people who've been studying this show that Michigan's getting past the curve, that we've gone past our peak. We're flattening the curve. Unfortunately, the governor has issued a new shelter-in-place order with even greater restrictions on it. And right now, there's apparently a drive-by protest occurring in our state capital of Lansing against the governor's new restrictive order. And I think they got a traffic jam about 10 miles long.
So what's the protest? I mean, is it just against the restrictions? And what are they doing? You say it's 10 miles long. Are they going through the cities, going by the Capitol? What's happening?
Yeah, they're driving past the Capitol. I understand that the state police have shut off the entrances off the freeway to the Capitol. It's getting so big. And what they're protesting is you can't go to your own residences within the state. There's problems with not being able to buy gardening seeds, tools. You can't repair your houses. They're closing different parts of places, so that you can't shop in there to do things to take care of your house or to occupy the time while you're sheltered in. And so to a large extent, what you're seeing is not so much they're not complaining so much about having to shelter in place to flatten the curve. What they're upset about is the fact that these new restrictions are worse than what you did in the first place before we started to flatten the curve. So it doesn't make any sense to normal people. And obviously, as you well know, people are very concerned about their future, their economic future. So we're concerned about lives and livelihood, and unfortunately, it seems that the governor is not taking the appropriate steps to try to find the balance to protect the public health and to protect people's pocketbooks.
Are they actually pulling people over and checking IDs and things like that if you're out and about, or how are they enforcing stuff?
Well, they've flown drones over golf courses telling people not to golf. They're telling people, they're actually ticketing people outside certain places if they're not buying essential goods. People have been, it's not as bad as California where you're not being encouraged to turn into the Stasi and report your neighbors. But there is some of that going on, and it's really hurting the comity amongst the citizenry, and it's really reducing the credibility in the trust in the government and public health officials for making rational decisions. Because Kent, as you know, look, every treatment could have side effects. The treatment apparently that we've adopted in the United States, the treatment for COVID-19, is to shelter in place in so many states across the country. The side effect of that treatment is the fact that we are in a recession, and we could potentially go into a depression, and that will have concomitant human cost related to it. Suicide, domestic abuse, homicide, substance abuse. These are the types of things that we want to make sure that we're not forgetting in the attempt to beat the virus.
You know, to me, you're a legendary congressperson. You're one of the few guys with balls big enough to really stand up and let them have it. And a lot of people go there to D.C. to do that. How do you decide to get into public service to start with? I know your mom was a city clerk or something up there in Michigan. How did you start or get the calling? What was your calling to get into public service?
My dad was asked a long time ago. He's in the University of Detroit's Sports Hall of Fame, the college down the street, for football. And so they went to him early and asked him if he'd ever run for public office. And he told them that they were crazy, that anybody who ever ran for public office was insane. Well, he married my mother, who clearly wasn't sane, who ran for public office. and he was a Democrat, she was a Republican, so, opposites attract, apparently. So my mother got elected to Livonia City Council, eventually got elected to be clerk. Now she's in the Livonia Hall of Fame. So I have 2 Hall of Fame parents. One was for sports, one was for politics, and they both passed away since. But my father had passed away before I decided to go into politics.
Got it.
And became a Republican, so he was spared having to see that. He would have considered that a great failure as a parent.
Well, I know you got out of school, you went to law school, you got out, you were a lawyer and, of course, the lead guitarist for the Flying Squirrels. Where in there did you decide to run for state senate?
Well, if I had any talent, I wouldn't have run for public office. I had to find something to do. We went bald early, so we didn't fit in the spandex, and, we were kind of a big hair band back in the 80s, man. If you're bald, so you're screwed. So I kind of figured, where do ugly, untalented people wind up? Well, usually in politics. So I figured it was for me. So I started off as a community college trustee, county commissioner, then the state senate, and then eventually I reached my level of incompetence in Congress.
So I got to ask, what compelled you to want to run for Congress? That's obviously a tough race. Just the race itself is tough, and then once you get in there, it's crazy. What was the calling on that?
Well, I've always, because I was homely, I always read a lot in high school. I didn't date much. So as kind of a student of history, when September 11th happened, obviously you could actually try to influence the course of events, not only here in the United States to protect us, but also around the world. In past capacities that I served, obviously in the state legislature, as a county commissioner, as a trustee at a community college, you don't have a foreign policy. Although some of the Dems wanted to, but technically they don't have that responsibility. But after September 11th, you could go to Congress and try to impact not only America, but the course of events in the world. And I was lucky when I got elected, Kent, because as you know, being from Illinois, I got to go to the Foreign Affairs Committee. It was one of my first assignments. I got to serve with Henry Hyde.
Oh, what a great guy.
It was amazing.
What a character. He was legendary as well. What was it like when you first announced that you were going to run for Congress? Was it difficult with having to work with the RNC and get their blessing and the state party and all that kind of stuff? And then what kind of nasty things did you encounter in the campaign?
Well, it was relatively a mild campaign by today's standards. I mean, I knew the guy who was running against me. We'd known each other for years. And so there wasn't that personal animosity driving it. It was more of a competition at that point. And especially coming out of September 11th, the lines between Republican and Democrat or conservative progressive certainly were not drawn as they are today. And so we went through it. It was a relatively mild campaign, very few negative ads, although the RNC did it, which I wasn't happy about, but they did what they did. I wound up winning, but it was a competitive, targeted seat, so it was always going to be that way.
So the RNC actually ran negative ads against you?
No, they probably wanted to by the time we were done. But they ran him against my opponent. Me and him are fine now. We get along after. I kind of teased him that he probably won the election because he's got a place down in Cabo San Lucas and I'm immured in Livonia, for the duration of the pandemic. So Kevin might have wound up winning that in the long run. But after you get elected, what they do, Kent, it's really interesting is coming out of the Midwest, coming out of the automotive capital of the world, we tend to be very practical people. And so when you get out there and you start to find that people in Washington, it wasn't called the swamp at the time. I prefer to, I'm probably more fond of it than Donald Trump is, so I call it a cesspool. Having been there, because at least a cesspool has a purpose. It's where the turds go. But when you look at it, they send you immediately, you go in there and you get assimilated. You go to these freshman orientations. The Democrats have one, we have one, and they tell you how to be a member. And to me, it was kind of funny because it's like the things that they tell you are designed to make sure that you start to think of the caucus, of the party as your family. And I kept telling people, I already got one family. We're not particularly fond of each other. I don't need to have another one because I don't think the results will be any better.
Well, who leads that orientation? Like, what happens when you first get to D.C.? You get to the airport, you go throw your bags away back at the hotel, you head to the Capitol. What happens?
Well, you get to meet the speaker. At the time, it was Dennis Hastert from Illinois. He's had his issues.
Yeah.
And then you meet people like Tom DeLay, who I love, and then you had like Roy Blunt, who's a senator now. He was like the assistant whip, and you meet him, and sometimes they'd be running for other positions, and so you'd already immediately get tied into those races, and the leadership would try to steer you to the appropriate candidate, things like that, and you get a pretty good sense of it. It was easier for coming from Michigan because we had a full-time legislature, and we had John Engler, who was a governor, who was the ultimate political mastermind. So you weren't surprised necessarily by what was going on, but I was surprised by the way that everything started to be Washington-centric. And so when you're a freshman member, the thing that really struck me right off the bat is, and I told people at the time, is it's always that place measures everything in money. It doesn't have the intellectual capacity to measure anything by means other than money. And so when you come in, the first thing they want to do is who raised the most money in their campaign? Who can raise the most money for the caucus? And the system is designed so that, because in the age of term limits, which Republicans have, whoever raises the most money gets all the attention, and they get put on the fast track, and somehow that seems to make you a leader. And as we know, given the budgetary issues that are out there in Washington, they don't measure money particularly well. Even using that as the measurement, it doesn't particularly work. So you could be a natural leader, but you'll be skipped over if somebody can raise more money.
So really the whole thing is orientation, and a lot of my friends who have been elected to Congress and when they come in as freshmen, they tell me that it has nothing to do with going in, doing the right thing, serving the people. It really has to do with raising money. They take you over, show you how to raise money, figure out who the great fundraisers are. Was that a problem for you, and can you even protest it, or you just get hammered if you do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's two things you do, and which is amazing. One is I always made sure I kept telling people I'm a legislator, not a telemarketer. All right. So
now, is it true that they actually have a telemarketing room? They set you down in a booth like a phone room salesperson?
Yeah, you can go to the Republican National Committee, and they got rooms, and you can go or the Capitol Hill Club. Obviously, all official, not official, no official resources, but they sit you down. You can all call, make your calls, show the RNC you've been good. But the way that I did it was I would always do my job, and if I did my job, you would diminish the amount of competition you'd have in the next election.
Right.
Because if you're doing a good job, who wants to run, right? And so then whatever money I had raised, I would then give as much as I possibly could to help other members. So I didn't have a leadership fund. So interestingly, I got elected to House leadership without having a leadership fund.
Wow.
Yeah,
so it all came down to your fundraising ability.
Up later just to help the other members. But it's really a money chase to a large extent. And if you can get bogged down in that, and it can lead you to take your eye off the district, which you never want to do.
I always wondered if there was a room up there where they took freshman congressmen, and sucked their brains out, because it seems like when they leave to go there, they go there with great intentions. And literally within the first few weeks, and I've got a lot of friends that have been elected, the first few weeks, everything changes. I mean, there is literally a drastic change in their focus.
Well, I think that's true to a large extent. Many of the people that go in there, they become, unfortunately, assimilated to that Washington environment, to that culture. Now, I serve with a lot of good people, like my friend Devin Nunes was never like that. We had you had principled people like Peter Roskam out of Illinois, too, was just a wonderful guy, very smart guy that knew what they wanted to do and went in there to do it. But if you come in there right off the bat and you don't say this is your first elective office, you would think that this is normal.
Wow.
And you don't have that depth of experience or that historical understanding of the institution to walk in the door and be prepared not to assimilate, but to try to change the place rather than let it change you.
So Barry Goldwater Jr. told me that, to your point, he said that he actually counsels former members of Congress. He was actually in Congress, here in Southern California years ago. He said he counsels those former members on what happens the day you leave office. He said the phone doesn't ring, it's silent as hell, not a heck of a lot going on.
Well, yeah, I'm a recovering politician. I tell people that. I'm open about it. We don't have any meetings out my way, but I mean, if they do, I'd attend them. In the final analysis, what you're looking at is you're normal before you go there, you get elected, right? The mindset has to be, you are a public servant. You work for the people in your district. That's who you work for. You work with the other members of Congress, and you work with the president, but you don't work for them. you work for your district. If that is the one thing you can have drilled into what's left of your mind after an election, before you head out to Washington, you'll be okay. If you start to think that the speaker's opinion matters more than the people at home, if you think the president's opinion matters more than the people at home, you might as well leave, because you're going to do a great disservice to the constituents that elected you.
So was there anybody that you really either looked up to, or at least you know, it could be from your party or from another party, you had sort of looked up to or really looking forward to working with, got there, and it was just a total big front, a big disappointment?
Well, the two guys that I really looked up to were the older members, and because they would tell you the unwritten rules of how to be successful representing your constituents. Henry Hyde was one of them on our side on the Republican side of the aisle. And the other was my colleague and neighbor, John Dingell, who was the longest serving House member in history. Because once you got elected, all the petty political stuff in their mind was out the window. And if you're young enough to want to ask the right questions, they were more than happy to help you learn how to do your job.
Got it.
And that is the type, and it was just, to me, it was just very kind of them to do that, because they didn't have to do that. Henry Hyde didn't have to do it. He was on his committee, but that didn't mean much, you know, but he was kind enough. Every time you'd ask him a question, he'd give you an honest answer. John Dingell was the same way. And in time, it actually helped in Michigan, because we had the auto industry bridge loan. And as a team, people like me and John Dingell worked together to actually protect all of our shared constituents here in the state of Michigan. And there weren't 10-mile traffic jams coming up to our office doors to demand that we reconsider.
Was there anybody you ever found just to be absolutely despicable?
Me. I think of myself more as deplorable, but you know.
So you got there when the original Stimulus Act was going on way back when. You know, we saw that act. You know, you guys, I think, did a pretty good job.
Voted against it.
Yep. Yeah, but I think you guys did a pretty good job, and your work in that thing I thought was fantastic, and the way you stood up and were pretty vocal about it. What's the difference in that stimulus then and what's going on right now? Because you know, right now we have a whole different kind of crisis.
Yeah, well, we're not looking at in the other stimulus. What they tried to do is they tried to get a recessed economy back again after the 2008 crash. Thank you, Mr. Wall Street tycoons. But they were trying to use the stimulus to affect underlying conditions, but that wasn't going to work. This was just throwing money, and we saw that with the shovel-ready projects, Barack Obama and the rest of them. And it wasn't going to work because the fundamentals of the economy had to be sound. We had to get through a deflationary period, and just throwing money at it wasn't going to work. And it wasn't even good politics for them to do it at the end, because in the midterms, we smoked them in the midterms. But when you look at this economy, the fundamentals are already sound, and they've deliberately shut off the economy, which means people's income is being shut off artificially. You're going to have a bunch of goods and services out there, and you're not ability to access them. And so what they're trying to do is protect people from a governmental decision to shut down the economy, even though the fundamentals are sound. Because what the government did in the past is, this is a government problem. In the last one, it was a fundamentally unsound economy that had to heal itself and had to have better prescriptions to do so.
Got it. 2012, you decided to run for president. And by the way, I think you would have made a fantastic president, probably still could in the future. No. What was that like when you, first of all, what made you decide to run?
Well, in my book, Seize Freedom, which I wrote in 2011, you could see the populist wave coming. If you look back at the era of good feeling that happened around the beginning of the 19th century here in America, under the Monroe administration and the rest of them, you could see where the country started to sense that there was an East Coast elite running it, and then you had the populist movement through Andrew Jackson and others. And so you could see this populist movement coming if you were paying attention and you were tuned to your districts. You could see it coming, and no one was articulating it. I also thought, obviously, Barack Obama was a poor president. I didn't support very many, if at all, of his policy prescriptions, and that was even before the nuclear pact with Iran. And so I thought that it was necessary to get that voice out there. Unfortunately, Fox News did everything it possibly could to make sure that I wasn't in the debates, which is kind of interesting. That's water under the bridge.
Well,
but
let's talk about what the politics are. When you decide you're going to run for president, what's the first call do you make? Do you call the RNC? Do you call party leadership? What do you do? And how do you stick that toe in the water?
My first one was to tell the constituents I was going to do it, because it was interesting watching the 2020 election, because I watched the message that I was running on be used in 2016 quite successfully by both Sanders and by President Trump, the populist message, with their own versions of it, but that was a populist message. And then when I watched people like Buttigieg, when you watch them, to be able to get in the debates was all I was trying to do. But magically, I was all of a sudden blacked out on Fox News for 6 months.
They just wouldn't book you on?
Nope.
Really?
No. And I introduced a bill on Social Security. Right towards the end of my campaign, they introduced a bill on Social Security, and they went through all the people running for president's bills except mine, and I had actually put a bill in that day.
Were they that far behind Romney, or were they? What was it?
I don't know. I don't work at Fox. I just know that I think it would have been different now. I think it was probably Ailes probably just decided that 7 people on the stage was too many. He prefers 6. So I have no quarrel with what they did. They did. It's water under the bridge. Fox has been kind to me before. They've been kind to me since. So it's just at that period of time, whatever the reasoning, the rationale was, they certainly missed the opportunity to explain the populist movement. And when I left the campaign, the first 4 primary states, I was head of Rick Santorum in Michigan and New Hampshire, and Rick wound up finishing second. And I love Rick, so I'm kind of glad he did. But at the end of the day, the goal was to get the populist message out so that we could have prevented Barack Obama from being reelected, helping to shape the Republican Party's agenda for the next several years. And it wound up by 2016, the public determined it was going to have that agenda one way or the other, be it through Sanders or be it through Donald Trump. Unfortunately, it was through President Trump.
Got it. What are you up to right now?
I'm locked down in Michigan.
If you weren't locked down, what are you doing? You're back to practicing law? I'm helping out the community? What are you doing?
I'm a contributor to American Greatness, the website. It's got some great writers there, people like Julie Kelly, Amina Milanic, and others. I do every now and then. I'll do some internet stuff, especially because I'm trapped in Michigan. I've learned to Skype. This old dog is learning some new tricks, and more importantly, I'm learning new licks on my guitars, because it's given me a whole lot of time, to expand my repertoire. Now the audience will be tricky. Because
you know what? Are we anticipating a return to music?
You put 5 people together in Michigan, you get a SWAT team trying to arrest you all. So it's going to take a while. I think we'll get there. I'll be back. The garage band will be reformed, and we'll be out. Making fools of ourselves once again.
I love it. Hey, Thaddeus, great to have you on with us. Where's the best place for people to find you?
In my home.
Not going to give that address out on air. I don't know. I'm
on Twitter, Thad McCotter at Twitter. I'm on Facebook, Thad McCotter. And they can, again, go to the American Greatness website, not just for me, but for all the other great writers that are there. They do a tremendous job over there.
That's great. Thaddeus McCotter, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your years of public service and being one of those few people in Congress that actually stood up.
Well, thanks to you, Kent, and for everybody who craves news.
Thaddeus McCotter.